Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. I am here with what I hope will be a fairly quick depth year update and ramble. I had intended this to be closer to the beginning of October so that it would be a kind of 3/4 of the way through the year depth year update, but here we are most of the way through October and I'm just getting to posting this now. But nonetheless, having talked about depth year on my channel throughout the year, I figure, in terms of kind of accountability and keeping everyone apprised of things, I would give a bit of an update. And then also I wanted to just end with something that I've been thinking about in terms of the idea of, depth year and low buy as a kind of principle, and rethinking that a little bit for myself. So if you have no idea what depth year is or what I'm talking about, I will put this video in a playlist. So you may want to go back to the first video in the playlist explaining the depth year for some context. But if you click this video, I'm assuming that you know what I'm talking about. So I had 4 categories of kind of areas in my depth year. And I set a few goals, fairly loose goals for each one. And so I'll just go through each of those 4 areas in turn, ending with decks, and then, I have a couple of things to ramble about at the end. So the first area that I wanted to look at my purchasing in the context of some depth year goals was on arts and craft supplies. And I set the goals of not starting new arts and crafts activities, and instead trying to, do more of and maybe get a bit better at the activities that I already enjoy. And just, using up the supplies that I have. I do have a tendency with arts and crafts supplies to get excited about something and, buy some things to do that, and then it maybe sits there, or I use those supplies for a little bit and then they mostly sit there unused. So I wanted to use the supplies that I have and only really buy craft supplies for existing hobbies if I am out of something really specific, right? And I've succeeded in this goal. The only arts and craft supplies that I've bought all year has been some thread for a specific cross-stitch pattern that I've been working on, and cross-stitch was a pre-existing hobby, and it was a specific item that I ran out of, so I've stuck to that goal well. The second area that I was considering, thinking about my purchases and having depth year goals for was books. And so I've talked about my book stack of shame before, the stack of books that I started the calendar year with that I had bought and had sitting around my house for a while but hadn't read yet. So I started the year with the goal to read all of those books before I bought any more hard copy books. I'd also set the goals to use my library more and also to make better use of my ebook reader because, it's environmentally friendly to use an ebook reader when you already own one. So to try to do that. I've already spoken about my book stack of shame being finished in a way that I am satisfied with, so I achieved that goal. And since doing that, I had also made it a priority to read diversely, both in terms of genre and in terms of voices that I'm reading or diverse authors, and reading, more in terms of authors of color, LGBT authors, and so on. I talked previously about the idea of decolonizing the bookshelf in a prior video. And it comes from a internet post which I linked. It's not an idea that I invented or anything like that. Trying to read, at least one book by an author of color for every book written by a white person that you've read, and also looking at, the bookshelves in your home critically, in terms of what's represented there. And I feel good about how I've been doing with those goals as well. I will say the only component of the depth year goals around books that I didn't really satisfy was the goal to use my library more. And that, has to do a lot with pandemic-related closures. The local library and the university library where I work have both been, have been closed for long periods of time or open only in very limited capacities. So I haven't really done that as much as I'd kind of hoped to otherwise. Though I have had some ebooks from the university library, which has been good. And I've used my Kindle as well, my ebook reader. So I'm happy with those goals. I have bought some more paperback books, of course, and hard copy books, but I have not accumulated another great big stack of shame. So I feel good about the depth year in terms of books. The third area was kind of general spiritual practice supplies. And so my depth year goals for kind of spiritual supplies were to not sign up for any new courses unless I finished the astrology course by Ben and Bell Wen, which I've bought but not finished. And then to just kind of low buy overall, not accumulate things like crystals and incense and candles, that I'm not using. Of course, like replace things that I use really regularly when I run out. Like I use particular incense for particular purposes, or, I go through tea lights. So things like this is fine, but to not be accumulating a lot of new things. And I also set the parameter that I wanted to not buy crystals this year. I gave myself a little exception for the gem show, which is right around my birthday, where you can see different vendors and you can really talk to them a lot about what they're selling. But I don't want to buy crystals right now because of concerns that I have with the, with the mining and the environmental and labor issues associated with that. So in terms of those goals, I feel pretty good about where I'm at as well. I have not signed up for any new courses, though admittedly, I also haven't finished my astrology course. I'm swamped right now with work, so I think that finishing the astrology course will actually be something that I have more time to look at in early 2021. I'm teaching 3 classes right now, university courses online. It's my first time teaching online, but I'm only going to teach probably 1 in the January term, so I'll have a bit more time to look at that. And I'm sticking to that goal of finishing that astrology course because I am very much interested in it and want to complete it and really enjoy the parts of it that I had started. And there's also a couple of courses that I've been looking at that if they're offered in 2021, I know that I will be interested in. I'm interested in potentially learning about geomancy in 2021. I'm also potentially interested, depending on what's available, in looking at taking the elements class, which is the foundational reclaiming tradition witchcraft class, if that's offered in a way that is accessible and one that I'm interested in. So I'll look at that in 2021. And I haven't bought any crystals other than the gem show. I bought a very few, and I bought 1 item from a personal friend. Other than that, nothing. And I haven't bought candles or incense or any of it except for replacing, an empty box of 1 incense that I use really regularly. So I'm on track with that one. The last goal, probably the one that folks are most interested in, was decks. So in terms of decks, I collect tarot decks. I'm happy with that. I did not set myself a no-buy year. I did not set myself a really strict number of decks that I was going to allow myself or anything like that. But I did kind of set the goal of mindful and maybe low buy deck purchasing this year, with particularly wanting to gain more awareness of my deck buying habits, my deck preferences, my collection, and if there's any kind of gaps in my collection that I feel like I would want to fill, to be more aware of when I'm buying decks, are they being used, things like this. And so, it's hard to say, have I succeeded in these very, very nebulous goals that were maybe deliberately a little bit vague, if I'm completely honest. But I will, I'll give the end of year summary on this, in December or January. But I will say that at this point in 2020, mid-October 2020, I have bought or backed 16 decks in the calendar year 2020 so far. So that's pretty good, I think. That's less than 2 decks a month if you average it out. It didn't actually work out that way. Some months there was maybe 3 and some months none. But 16 decks total. Some of those I have now, and some of those have been Kickstarter backs that I won't see probably until 2021. So At the end of the year, I will do a recap video of all the decks that I've purchased or backed in 2020. And I do plan to actually, in the spirit of depth year, self-awareness building and accountability, I'm going to add up that number of money spent. I will say that James Eads and Cosmovision's Kickstarter campaign got me in terms of spending. The add-ons just kept coming and the stretch goals, and I enthusiastically changed my pledge to a higher number repeatedly on that campaign. I know I'm not alone in that one, though. But I've been keeping track of what I've bought and what I've spent. I haven't added it up yet, but I've been keeping a wish list and also a list of my collection, inspired very much by Kim at Abundant Life Tarot. I'll link Kim's course below on choosing decks and kind of curating a collection, which I've just signed up for the course, and I caught a live talk about wish lists with Kim the other day, and it was really wonderful. I'm in awe of her spreadsheets and her organization, and mine are very basic by comparison, but I've talked previously about, maintaining a wish list being a really good thing that I've adopted this depth year that I'm going to be keeping. So, yeah, that's 16 decks in 9 months and a bit. And I feel good about that. Again, I didn't set a strict, no buy or 5 decks in the year or anything like that. I didn't set a spending number either. And I joke about James Eads' campaign and my bank account hurting a little bit after all those excellent add-ons, but I'm completely comfortable with what I've spent this year on decks. Which brings me to this thought process that I've been having about the whole depth year, deck buying, goal setting phenomenon. And and obviously the idea of the depth year and looking at deck purchasing, I'm far from the first person in this community to do it, and everyone has kind of approached it in their own way, and some folks who've done depth years have set very specific goals around either a no buy year or only a few decks in a year. Others have taken maybe a looser approach, more like mine. And I respect everybody's decisions around that and abilities to engage in their depth years in whatever ways work for them. And I think it's great that we're having these kinds of conversations. But something that I have been thinking more and more about, in the context of tarot decks in particular, but it's certainly something that I have thought about and do think about in all areas of my life, right, is this idea of voting with your dollar, right, and using spending decisions or buying decisions to demonstrate, support for particular, creators or projects or products that you want to see in the world, and then on the flip side, electing not to put money towards projects that you don't support, right, or towards companies that you don't support, and the idea of voting with your dollar, I think, is really powerful, right, and it's something that I think about in again other areas of my life, thinking about how I buy clothing, thinking about my diet and how I buy food, and all areas really, thinking about spending decisions and buying decisions, not just in terms of what they do for me, and what I'm getting and whether I use what I'm getting and how I feel about what sure, but those decisions, those purchasing decisions and spending decisions have so many more impacts than just that, right? When we buy things, when we spend money on things, that does something in the world, right? And so I feel like I have to think about my deck buying in that way too. And I'm not just, thinking of this for the first time, obviously. There have been decks that I've decided not to buy because, for whatever reason, I didn't support them, right? And there are, decks in my collection, and I've talked about this before as well. There's only 2 that I've found out things about the creators that had I known, or had they been public knowledge when I bought those decks, I wouldn't have bought those decks, because I'm not interested in giving my money, for example, in the case of both of those decks, to creators who espouse hateful and discriminatory attitudes, right? I don't want them to have my money, and end of it. That's how I feel. And so I feel like, as I'm thinking about, do I want to do another depth year? Am I going to do something like this for 2021? What am I learning in this whole process, and what will that mean going forward? I'm thinking about the ways that sometimes these goals, like low buy or no buy, might get in the way of the ability to vote with one's dollar, right? Because, let's say I decided, and I didn't decide this, but let's say theoretically I had decided to spend no money on decks in 2020, and I stuck to that. I just bought no decks all of 2020. Then that would mean that, quite a few amazing projects that have come out in 2020 that I've supported, that I think are incredible and need to be in the world, that I wouldn't have supported, that I would have withheld my money from because of a kind of prior decision on my part. And I'm not comfortable with that, So I'm glad that I didn't take that strict no buy for myself. Because that, in a sense, to me, and I'm reasoning out loud here, so probably not the most coherent. Hopefully I'm making sense. Having a really, really strict no buy and sticking to that is kind of the functional equivalent of boycotting whatever comes out that year, right? Because you've already decided in advance that, well, I'm not going to spend money on it no matter what it is. And so the effect is the same as if you decided not to spend money on it on some sort of principled grounds. Like the money isn't spent, the support isn't given to that creator or that project either way. And I don't love that. So, I don't think I'm saying anything particularly novel here. I will say that. I think that there's been lots of, good, important conversations in tarot community and in, all areas of life about voting with one's dollar, about supporting, important projects and creations and creators and organizations and so on. And also, the potential kind of political importance of maybe deciding not to support some things which are problematic, right? That idea is not something I'm originating here, but I do think that it's an idea that doesn't come up in context of conversations about depth year specifically enough. Because I feel like, and I'm talking about my own videos on my depth year when I say this, so much of the idea of depth year is about, your own experience with the things that you own. Going deep with the things that you own as opposed to adding more things. Ensuring that the things that you have are things that you value and that you use and that work for you. Building awareness about, whether, for example, something that you buy on impulse perhaps doesn't get used as much as something that you really consider for a long time. All of these things are very, very individualized considerations, about individual personal experiences. But at the end of the day, I guess, all I'm saying is that when we add something to our collection, whether that's our tarot collection or, anything that we have, that we've spent money on, that we own, that spending decision, that money decision does things in the world and affects, more than just us individually. So, I would like to bring those considerations into depth year more and into my own, considerations of my own depth year at the end of the year. I'll have hopefully more better organized thoughts to share on this, and I'm interested to hear what others have to say about this as well and what folks think, because again, it's just something that's been floating around in my mind that I thought I would share, in the interest of sharing how my depth year is going. So yeah, that's where I've ended up. Again, at the end of the year, I will share my, absolute final depth year update where everything has ended up. And in particular, I think I'll break it down and make a video specifically just about decks. So decks I've bought this year, and why. And, I'll add it. I will be brave and, add it up and share what I've spent this year. And some final thoughts on depth here once I get there. And maybe, who knows, what I'm going to be doing in 2021, if anything, related to this. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that this ramble has made some kind of sense. I'm never quite sure if they do. Yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.